a synapse where acetylcholine is involved or where it's being released. So from the axon terminal, the postsynaptic cell, it's going to be releasing acetylcholine that's going to bind. I'm sorry, did I say postsynaptic? I meant the other one. The presynaptic neuron is going to be releasing acetylcholine, and it's going to bind to to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. So a cholinergic synapse is a synapse where acetylcholine is being released. Make sense? Alrighty. Okay, we'll keep scrolling down through these questions. And I'm sorry, it's going to take me a while to get caught up on everything. I know that there's some questions being typed in the chat as we're going. Christina asked, what does it mean when a muscle spans one or two joints? I think that question, so all it's asking there is basically where the motion's going to happen. So if a muscle spans two joints, let's talk about, like the rectus femoris muscle, it attaches at your pelvis in one of your os coxae bones, and it actually it inserts all the way down at your tibia via the patellar tendon. So it crosses both your hip and your knee. So what does that mean for the muscle? Yeah, it's going to move both the hip and the knee. Yeah, so it's going to move, yeah, you could say femur and tibia. We're typically going to talk about the actual articulation, though, rather than the bones. So we would say, the hip and the knee. It's going to move both of those joints. So that's all. Whatever joints a muscle crosses, those are the ones that it moves. I'm just going to keep scrolling down in chronological order in the chat. Is there a correlation between neurophysiology and the neuromuscular junction? That's just a general, yeah. The neurophysiology. Neurophysiology just keeps talking about how something works. So neurophysiology just means how does the neuron work? And the neuromuscular junction is part of how the neuron works. So I don't know if that was the lecture notes question or not, but that's like you need to understand how a neuron works to understand what it's doing at the neuromuscular junction is a better way to work that. Okay, scrolling down, neuroglial cells and the CNS and their functions. We'll save that for when we start going through some of the concepts. The difference between channels. Oh, okay, maybe that was the question. Is there a difference between the channels, ion channels in the muscle, and then in the neuron? So depending on, we learned about a lot of different ion channels, and some of them you find on both a neuron and a muscle. So for example, what's an example of an ion channel where you have some of them in the neuron and you also have some on the muscle? Yeah, calcium channels, specifically what type of calcium channels do you have on both? What type of calcium channels do you have both on the axon terminal and then in the muscle? Yeah, voltage-gated calcium channels. We had voltage-gated calcium channels on the axon terminal, and we also had voltage-gated calcium channels in the sarcoplasmic reticulum inside the muscle. Tessa, you're also correct. You're also going to have so when we're saying these channels, we want to be very specific about which types we're talking about, because we have, for sodium channels, for example, you have some that are chemically gated and you have some that are voltage gated. Where do you find the chemically gated sodium channels? Yeah, you find the chemically gated sodium channels at the motor end plate in the neuromuscular junction, because that's what's binding to the neurotransmitter. And voltage-gated sodium channels, you find those anywhere that an action potential is going to happen, because we know that voltage-gated sodium channels are what kind of control when an action potential happens. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap there between the types of, like, you know, some of them you find on both a neuron and a muscle, some you might find on just one or the other. But yeah, that's something that is applicable to both types of cells. Okay. Let's see. If acetylcholine was released from the axon terminal but could not bind to its receptor, what does that mean that the muscle won't contract? Sorry, I started out reading your question wrong, Charisse. I misread it. Okay, so if acetylcholine is released from the axon terminal, but it can't bind to the receptor, will the muscle not contract? Yes, you're correct. Okay. So sorry, if you guys can't see that question, Charisse asked a question that said, if acetylcholine is released from the axon terminal, but then it doesn't bind to the receptor, is the muscle going to contract? No contraction, right? Because if acetylcholine doesn't bind to its receptor, you never start the action potential. Exactly, Tess said. The action potential will not continue, so you won't ever actually have the contraction. But yeah, Charisse, you answered that correctly in your question too. Okay, let's keep scrolling down. Which muscle is the prime mover for shoulder flexion? Deltoid or pectoralis major? Anybody want to answer that? Which muscle is the prime mover for shoulder flexion? Everybody do shoulder flexion at their desk. Yes, correct. It is the pectoralis major. Shoulder flexion is reaching your hand forward as if you're shaking somebody's hand. The major muscle that's contracting during that is the pectoralis major. The deltoid's going to help, you're right, but only the front part of the deltoid. You can kind of divide the deltoid into three parts. You've got the front part, which has those fibers that are on the anterior side of the shoulder. And those are going to help with flexion, but they're so small compared to the pectoralis major that they can't be the prime mover because it's only part. Yes, absolutely, Vanessa. The deltoid is a synergist. We would say the deltoid's a synergist for shoulder flexion because it's going to help, but it definitely doesn't produce the majority of the force during that motion. Absolutely right. And you're also correct there. The latissimus dorsi is the prime mover for shoulder extension, which is the opposite motion, reaching backwards. And the deltoid is also a synergist for that. So that's an interesting thing about the deltoid is that it's a synergist for opposite motions. It's a synergist for shoulder flexion and for shoulder extension. And it's just because of the shape of the deltoid. It's got some fibers on the front of the shoulder and then also some fibers reaching around the back of the shoulder. Yeah, you can say it's a synergist for most of the motions at the shoulder. What's the one thing that the deltoid can't do at the shoulder? Because it does extension, flexion, and abduction. But you're right, it does not do adduction. And it cannot do that because of its location. And Vanessa, you said what would be the antagonist? The antagonist for which motion? Because we talked about those roles, antagonist and prime mover, when we're talking about specific motions. So which motion are you asking about? Oh, flexion. Okay, so shoulder flexion is reaching forward. What's going to be the opposite motion of that? Extension, and the prime mover for shoulder extension, we said was the latissimus dorsi. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's weird because you're right. The prime mover and antagonist and all that are talking about when muscles have opposite roles for a specific motion. So the question's always going to include, or you have to talk about both, if that makes sense. Why does the knee have two menisci? What are the menisci? Yep, they're cushioning. Think about the shape of the where the meniscus or the menisci are sitting. They're sitting at the base of the femur. And if you remember anything about the shape of the base of the femur, what does it have two of? Oh, somebody already said it there. Megan, you're correct. That the femur at the base of it has those two condyles, which are basically like two little bumps at the end of it. So you need a meniscus for each of them. That's why. Okay, let me keep scrolling. I'm sorry, I realized I missed a question back at 11 to 7. Kiru asked, what cell is responsible for creating the myelin in a neuron that extends from the spinal cord to the muscle? Okay, so if we're talking about a neuron that extends from the spinal cord to the muscle, is that the peripheral or the central nervous system? It goes from the spinal cord to the muscle. Peripheral or central? Ooh, we got some disagreement. It's actually, so we're talking about the neuron that actually goes to the muscle. Yes, that's going to be the peripheral nervous system. Our peripheral nervous system neurons are ones that are actually in the body itself. They're going to connect to the spinal cord, typically. They have to have a connection point. They have to have a synapse with the central nervous system. But if it's actually going to a muscle or coming from a muscle or coming from the skin or something like that, that's a peripheral nervous system neuron. And Tessa's right. Since it's a peripheral nervous system neuron, it's going to be a Schwann cell is the one that's doing that. So that neuron, let me ask a different question. That neuron that's going from the spinal cord to the biceps brachii muscle, what would you name that neuron? Of those four, we have ascending, descending, afferent, efferent. What would you name that neuron? Yes, you guys are correct. It would be an efferent neuron because it's a motor neuron in the peripheral nervous system. Y'all are absolutely correct there. Okay. Sheen asked, what is unique concerning the facial muscle? So any of the facial muscles. What's the difference between, let's say, the zygomaticus major and a biceps brachii? What's different about its attachments? Yeah, facial muscles, they insert into the skin. So that means that they're going to usually originate on bone. Usually, they don't have to. But they're going to insert into the skin, which means that when they contract, they're pulling the skin of our face. So that's why the zygomaticus major, for example, it's going to insert into the corners of our mouth. And when it contracts, we smile because that pulls the skin on our face so that we give that facial expression. Okay, keep scrolling down. Ebony asks, smooth muscle has a much longer contraction time, and contraction often begins very slowly. Relaxation is delayed. Why is that significant? So think about where you find smooth muscle as opposed to skeletal muscle. Where is smooth muscle usually located? Or just one example. Yeah, around your organs, your stomach, your intestines. Do you need to have super quick contractions, like lightning fast reflexes in your digestive system? Nah, you don't need them. They don't need to be super fast. So smooth muscle contractions just going to be different. In our skeletal muscle, we can just sort of give a quick contraction of our biceps, and we'll just sort of flick our arm up, and then it'll be over. But in your organs, it's a much slower onset. So when you're going to have a contraction in your intestines, it's going to like slowly build up, and then it'll peak, and then it'll slowly slow back down. And that's just better for your organs. It would be kind of, it might be damaging to your stomach if it was able to just like, squeeze really tight all of a sudden and then relax. That's going to create too much pressure inside your body. And it would probably not have very pleasant effects on our digestion. So it's just because it's got a different role. That too, Tessa, yeah, you're not going to have as much fatigue because if you have a lot slower. So fatigue happens in our muscles when they're contracting like too hard for too long, and they might need to start switching over into anaerobic ways of generating ATP, and that's going to create lactic acid. And obviously, that's something that we don't want to build up in our body because it's not good for our tissues. It's going to lower the pH. So that's another reason, because if the slower the whole process takes, the less likely you are to have any kind of bad waste products building up. Everything's going to be able to clear out slowly. Okay. I think we might be caught up. Julian asked, what is TREAP? What does TREAP mean? TREAP is something that happens when you send an action potential to muscles very close together. Usually, if you send an action potential to a muscle, it's going to contract and then it'll relax. And then if you wait a minute and send the exact same action potential, the contraction would look exactly the same if you wait long enough. But if you send them closer together, then the second contraction is a lot stronger, or at least a little bit stronger. So why would the second contraction be stronger if you're sending the action potentials very close together? What's there going to be more of in the muscle cell if you're stimulating them one after the other? Yeah, Melinda and Megan, you guys are right. If you're stimulating the muscle cells really close together, then you're going to have more calcium present in the sarcoplasm. And that means that the next contraction is going to be a little bit stronger. So yeah, that's what TREAP is talking about. When you stimulate the muscles close together, like in frequency, like one after the other, then the contractions will get a little bit stronger, and it's because there's more calcium present. In TREAP, there's longer relaxation time. Actually, no, not necessarily. TREAP, there's two different words that are kind of talking about similar things. TREAP is when you send the action potentials one after the other, and you allow just enough like you basically, you're starting the next contraction right as the relaxation ends. And then the other option is wave summation. Let me see if I can draw this one out. The other option is wave summation. I'll just draw the action potential, or sorry, not the action potential, the actual muscle contraction. This is what TREAP would look like. So you allow the contraction to end before you started the next one. But then in wave summation, it would be if you didn't quite allow the whole relaxation to end. You, sorry, it looks weird on my screen for some reason. Before the relaxation could end all the way, you stimulated it again. So that's the difference between those two things. So the complete relaxation just means that all of the tension has gone out of the muscle. Like there's no measurable tension left. You've kind of relaxed it all the way. There might still be higher amounts of calcium present in the sarcoplasm because it takes a while for the calcium to get all the way back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So that's why you're still going to have that stronger contraction. If you stimulate it again right here, you're still going to have higher amounts of calcium present in the sarcoplasm when you release that again. And yes, Melinda, you're correct. Tetanus is when you don't allow any relaxation period. So you're just stimulating the action potential, the muscles one after the other, and you're not allowing any relaxation time. And yes, if you're right, in TREAP and summation, the second one's always stronger because there's more calcium present. Maria, the second one, this example, this is called wave summation. Yeah, or summation, Okay, let me keep scrolling down. I'm sorry, I'm just still getting caught up on the chat messages. Pokua asks, how can we learn the muscle movements in a simpler way? My advice to learning the muscle movements was to actually do them when you're learning them. Don't just try to memorize the words on a flashcard. Like, don't try to memorize, okay, shoulder flexion is moving the shoulder forward. Instead, actually do the motion at your desk or wherever you're learning it. So say shoulder flexion, and then do the motion while you're saying shoulder flexion, because that'll really connect. Like it's a better mind-body connection to where it's going to stay in your brain longer. It'll be a trigger for your memory, so that when you're actually doing the motion, you're going to think of the word, and vice versa. Yeah, so that's my advice for it. And if anybody else has other ways that they've learned the muscle motions better, feel free to share. Thanks for mentioning the Quizlet. Let me share that with everybody here. Let me put that into the chat. I have a couple of links I wanted to share with you guys anyways. So let me find that so I can send it. So my class is talking about, I made a Quizlet that has the muscle names and actions on it. So give me 1 second to find this. Okay. Yeah, and you might feel kind of silly at your desk, like almost doing Simon Says with yourself, but it really helps. It just does. I do the same thing when I'm learning the muscles themselves, like learning the name of the muscle. If I say, okay, biceps femoris, I'm actually gonna, like touch on my body where the biceps femoris is. Triceps, I'm gonna find where that is on my own body, because it makes it stick better in your brain when you're just looking at all these words that are new to you. So that's the Quizlet that I wanted to share with y'all. While I'm sending you links, let me also send you the Kahoot, since we're definitely not going to have time to do the Kahoot today. There's the Kahoot review. There we go. So you guys can also bookmark that on your computers to play for later. If you lose it before the weekend, you can email me and I'll send it to you again. Just while I'm thinking about that. So yeah, Quizlet and then Kahoot. Two good ways to practice for the exam. Okay, I'm gonna keep scrolling through the questions. I think we're almost caught up. Chrissy said, why is it when the sternocleidomastoid turns right, your head turns left? So it's not that it's turning right, it's just we're talking about that the right sternocleidomastoid is contracting. So this is a good reason why it's good to actually learn the locations of the muscles on your own body. So the sternocleidomastoid originates on your sternum. So if you put your left hand or your left finger is like on the top of your sternum and then follow that muscle, it's going to insert into the bump behind your ear. That's the mastoid process on your temporal bone. So if you find that with your right hand, and then imagine now pulling those two fingers basically closer together. When you turn your head left, you see that your fingers get closer together. It's because it's at a diagonal. And it's because it's inserting into kind of the back part of your head almost, because we're going behind our ear. So yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive when you just look at it on paper. But if you actually find it on your own body, you can, it makes sense. So the right sternocleidomastoid goes from the middle of your sternum, the top of your sternum, to behind your right ear. And yeah, when that contracts and shrinks, it's going to pull your head so that your head turns left. Now, when the right sternocleidomastoid contracts, your head turns left. Okay, let me turn my camera on. Yeah, this is one of those things that it's hard to describe what's happening. Let's make that. So I'm sharing the camera to. Okay, here we are. So, this middle of the sternum, sorry, my camera's at the bottom of the screen, so I'm going to have to do this. Middle of the sternum, this is where the sternocleidomastoid originates. And then it's going to insert back here, behind the ear. So if this is like the ends of the two muscle, contracting is when this muscle is going to get shorter. So when I pull those fingers closer together, I'm turning my head to the opposite side. All right? That means this muscle, my right sternocleidomastoid, is contracting. It turns my head to the left. Make sense? A little bit? You can do it on yourself too? Yeah, so you can actually feel your fingers getting closer together when you do that. Here's where the muscle begins. Here's where it ends. Again, this is on my right side. You can do this on your own neck. Hold those fingers closer together. You see that it turns your head to the left. Is that making sense? Yeah. This is why in my class I made everybody stand up and do all the motions, because it just makes more sense when you do it yourself. All right. Okay, let's go back to the whiteboard. Okay. Now you guys are gonna make me act everything out. Okay, we can do motions, sure. Okay, let me find where we are. And yes, Tessa, you're correct with both of them contract because you've got one on either side. Let me turn the camera back on to the screen. Nope, not files. Okay. I've got too many screens. I don't know where I'm supposed to be looking. Okay. We are saying, okay, hip extension and knee flexion. Yeah.
We can't hear you, ma'am. We can't hear you.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now? Now there's going to be like a crazy echo because I turned my headphones off. Okay. Hip extension, it's going backwards. Same with shoulder extension. I did shoulder extension at the same time. Hip and shoulder extension at the same time. Flexion is typically forwards. So like this would be elbow flexion, elbow extension. But the knee is different. The knee is backwards. So this would be knee flexion. But the true definition of flexion is decreasing the angle. So that's you're decreasing the angle in your leg. That's knee flexion. Yeah, extension and hyperextension are very similar. They're the same motion. It's just depending on how far past the point of the axis of the body you go. So yeah, technically this is shoulder extension and then this is shoulder hyperextension. But you see it's the same motion all the way. The same muscle is going to be doing it. Same with the hip. So technically this is hip extension and then that's hyperextension. But it's the same motion all the way through. It's just where you are in the orientation of the body. That makes sense? Okay. sound like I'm in like a stadium because of the echo. I think, did we get all the motions? Okay. Oh, let's cut that off.
We can hear you, ma'am. We can hear you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it was this. The microphone was on the computer, but it got turned off on here. Sorry about that. Okay. I don't think I even said anything important. It's not. I was just reading through the comments. Okay. Okay, I don't even, yeah, we didn't get any new questions that I can see. Okay. So I see that there was a question, what happens when both sternocleidomastoid muscles contract? Did we answer that already? If you're contracting both of them at the same time, what are you going to do? Yeah, you bend your neck down. So that would be neck flexion. So with extension and hyperextension, they're both going to be done by the same muscles. So neck extension and then neck hyperextension, what muscle's doing that? It would have to be on the back. Yeah, the trapezius. So the trapezius is responsible for both extension and neck hyperextension. Same with any of the muscles. Like extension and hyperextension are going to be done by the same muscle because it's the same motion, you know, this like shoulder extension and then shoulder hyperextension. It's the same muscle that's contracting through that whole thing. Okay. Tessa, on the test, I feel like they're going to be more specific to try and if they're not more specific and they just say the arm moving backwards, either one would be correct. So you couldn't be marked incorrect for extension or hyperextension because it's the same thing. So that I would think that they would be more specific. And again, same thing, Sydney. If they're saying looking up, you could say extension or hyperextension because they're not specifying if you're looking up like this or if you're looking up like this. So don't worry. Don't lose sleep over them. I don't have a problem with you standing up during the exam. You just have to make sure that you're staying in the camera, remember, because with Respondus, you have to stay on screen. So as long as you're not standing up and walking off screen, I think it'd be fine. You might want to run that by your actual professor, that they're not going to take points off. But yeah, I don't think there'd be any problem with like doing this stuff on the exam. Okay. And yeah, Melinda, you asked, hyperextension technically means, you know, extension beyond the normal axis of the body. So yeah, you could say beyond anatomical position if you want. You're talking about the same thing. Cindy, I always tell people when they get points taken off for policy things. Yeah, I don't just take the points off and leave it blank. So if you haven't gotten any emails from me about breaking policy, then that means you haven't broken the policy. And that's for, again, I'm sorry, that's for my class. I don't know about the rest of you guys. I would assume that any instructors would let you know if you're breaking policy, because we don't want you to do it on the next exam. Yeah, that's a good way to test it, Tessa. If you're thinking either the hamstring, the anterior or the posterior side, that's going to tell what direction it's going in. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'll ask you guys some questions. I just want to make sure that everybody's questions get answered first, because this is good. This is important stuff. Is the screen black? Is my camera still showing? Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, well, I'll take this opportunity to turn my camera off anyways. Well, that means you can't see my dog giving me confused looks anymore. Okay, resend the Kahoot, no problem. Yeah, I'll send them, remind me to send them at the end, so make sure that we get everybody. Let me see if it's still in my clipboard. Yep, here it is. That saves time. Okay, I think we got everybody's question. The only question I know we didn't quite get to was the neuroglial cells. And the functions of them are pretty easy to find in the textbook. The main thing, you just need to know like the main job of each neuroglial cell. So like example, oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells do myelin. You need to know which one does the blood-brain barrier, which one does CSF, and that's kind of as in detail as you need to know them. So that information is pretty easy to find in the textbook. And if you can't find it, you can let me know. Okay. All right, any other questions, any other content questions before we can spend the last 15 minutes just doing review questions? Yes.
I saw a question in the book, but I don't remember exactly where to type it. But it was saying that which ligament, I know it was the collateral, which ligament stopped the knee from turning a lateral rotation. Which ligament stops the knee from doing lateral rotation? That was it.
Lateral rotation of what?
The knee.
Okay, so, well, ligaments aren't going to ligaments don't contract. So what was it saying, like which ligament stretches out when the knee is getting rotated?
No, it said which ligament stop the knee from rotation.
Okay, I see. So if you laterally rotate your knee, you can think which side is, So you know what knee like lateral knee rotation is like when you twist your leg outward. So you can think which side is getting kind of stretched when you do that. And a couple of people did put it in the chat. It's going to be the medial collateral ligament, because that's when you're stretching your knee, when you're twisting your knee to the lateral side, you're twisting it outward. It's going to be the medial collateral ligament that gets pulled on to do that. Okay. Sharice, you said you have a question earlier in the chat. What? I'm sorry. Was it the one about the hamstrings? Is the action of the hamstrings? Okay, yeah. So since the hamstrings are on, yeah, okay. Why are mitochondria important in cardiac muscle? Yes, you are correct. So you kind of answered the question, and that the mitochondria are needed for cellular respiration. What's the end goal of cellular respiration? Anybody? Lots of ATP, specifically, yeah. It's ATP production, and it's lots of it, and it's ATP production that doesn't really give you a waste product. You know, the anaerobic fermentation you end up creating lactic acid, which is not good. So And mitochondria, cellular respiration, you don't have the same kind of toxic waste product being produced. Yeah, you are producing heat and you're also producing CO2, but our body has ways of getting rid of those things. Better than, or like, in a better way, like more efficient than getting rid of the lactic acid. Okay, let's see. How does the CNS repair? So that's going to go back into the job of the neuroglial cells. So you'd have to look back at the neuroglial cells and see which one is involved in repair. And there is one specific one that specifically does clean up damaged tissue. Astrocytes will help. Astrocytes are part of the blood-brain barrier. There's another one that does phagocytosis. Yeah, the microglia, because those are kind of modified white blood cells. So those are going to be the main ones involved in that. Okay, how can a neurotransmitter be inhibitory at one synapse and excitatory at another? So what controls whether or not a signal is inhibitory or excitatory? What do they do to the neuron? You guys are right. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Give it a positive charge or a negative charge.
Exactly, yeah. So to do with what channels it opens, because some channels will make the cell more positive, maybe by letting in sodium or letting in some other positive ion like calcium. Either way, if they're making it more positive, that's going to be an excitatory signal. And the opposite, if they're making the cell more negative, that's going to be an inhibitory signal. So you could have one channel, like let's say acetylcholine, because that's an example of one that is inhibitory at some and excitatory at others. In the neuromuscular junction, acetylcholine opens sodium channels, which makes the cell more positive, which is an excitatory signal. But at other synapses, acetylcholine will open maybe potassium channels. And at that synapse, it's going to be inhibitory, because if you open potassium channels, you're allowing potassium out, that makes it more negative. So it's just because the chemical can do different things depending on which channels are on the other end. Yes, facilitation is what we call the moving towards an excitatory signal. When you're making the cell a little bit more positive, that's called facilitation, and it is excitatory. Okay, let me make sure. Why are mitochondria important? What rotator cuff muscle is synergistic with the deltoid and shoulder abduction? So that's just asking which rotator cuff muscle does abduction. There's only one. And if you know the locations of each of the rotator cuff muscles, it should be pretty easy to identify which one it is. And yes, you guys are correct. It's the supraspinatus, because that's the one that's that really skinny little strip of muscle that runs over the top of the shoulder. So that's going to do abduction. Chrissy, you're correct. A synaptic end bulb is the same thing as an axon terminal. That's the thing that has a lot of different words for it. Okay, I think we hit everything. Neuromodulators. Neuromodulators. I'm not even sure I recognize that word. Is that in the lecture notes? Oh, are they talking about endorphins? Okay. I'll take your word for it because I have not looked that closely at it. Page 140. Based on the name, I would assume that a neuromodulator is going to be something that endorphins. Oh, okay, I see. Because they affect the function of neurotransmitters. So yeah, that's I would not expect to see that word on an exam, because yeah, that's new to me. I have not seen that on a test question before. So that tells you how much you need to know about them. Yeah, Tessa, you want a job in the STEM Center? You know the lecture notes very well. That is very, very good. I'm half joking, but I'm also half serious. I might email you later. Okay, great. So I think we hit everybody's question. Any other burning questions? Okay, I have a very limited number of review questions. The main thing that I would do for review is that Kahoot that I just showed you guys, or sent you the link to. Let's see, which questions do we have time to do? Let's start here. I don't think we did these last week. So, did we do these last week? I get confused about what we did in class versus what we did here. Does this look familiar to people? A patient is experiencing pressure in the brain caused by an increased amount of cerebral spinal fluid production. Which cells are responsible? And you guys can circle it on the screen, or you can do it in the chat. Most people are doing it in the chat. That's good. It's going to be C, ependymal cells. So that gives you an idea of a level of how in detail you need to know the functions of the neuroglial cells. If you know the basic job that they do, you should be fine. You know that ependymal cells do CSF production. So when we're talking about anything that has to do with that, it's going to be ependymal cells. Mercy, the Kahoot, the exam is going to be the 50 questions long. The Kahoot is just kind of like a sampling of questions. It's not an exact replica of the exam. Yeah, Vanessa.
So with the astrocytes, would the main one that we need to know, would it just be the blood-brain barrier?
Yeah, that's the main thing that they do. I think they also, whatever, in your lecture notes, I think it also mentions that they have something to do with potassium ion concentration in the brain.
Yeah, the balance.
Yeah, so, that's something that you would just need to be able to recognize on, a multiple choice question. If it's a short answer question and you say blood-brain barrier, that's accurate.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Someone who has diseased or damaged oligodendrocytes would likely have what symptoms? So this is another question where you need to know the function of the cell to kind of figure out what's going to happen if it goes wrong. Okay. We all feel pretty confident about A. You guys are correct. Because what do oligodendrocytes do? Yep, they make myelin, and we know that myelin makes sure it helps with sending action potentials. So if you don't have myelin, things are going to go wrong with your action potentials. And somebody mentioned MS, then you're correct. That's what MS is. MS is when these oligodendrocytes get damaged or they stop working, and that means that demyelination is going to start happening in your central nervous system. And so you end up with this numbness, pain, paralysis as